Hello there, Tiff. Thank you for inviting me, and also thank you for doing this because it's of great value and education to many people, and it could be very lasting. My name is Robert Thatcher. I have a PhD in psychology with training in neuroscience. I worked at the National Institutes of Health and was a professor at NYU School of Medicine and University of Maryland. And over the years, collected a large database that's FDA registered, carefully collected using very high standards, many of which myself and Roy John and Leslie Pritchett created it when I worked at NYU School of Medicine. And so it's compatible with that database, with the NX link, but it is much, or BrainDX, but it's much larger. It goes from birth to 82 years of age. And BrainDX has older ones, but these databases clearly meet the fundamental standards under FDA and through the National Institutes of Health that had oversight in the creation of these databases. So this is a patient, that you can see the EEG of this patient who was assaulted. He's a 55-year-old man, was assaulted and robbed and struck on the right parietal region. He ended up with an epidural hematoma. He's paralyzed on the left. He has spatial neglect. That is, he doesn't see anything left side of the world. He does not shave the left side of his face. Doesn't put buttons correctly into his shirt buttonholes. But he's quite verbal. He was very intelligent. So the first thing we do is make sure that there's good quality of recording immediately. And also in NeuroGuide, you can click options. This is very important screen where you put in all the patient's information that you can, because this can be used in an automatic clinic report. You make sure you note the medications, the date of test, the time of test, the date of birth, the gender, handedness, as much information as you can, you put in there, because as I mentioned, all will go into a clinic report automatically. And so the goal here is to link the patient's symptoms to dysregulation in the patient's brain. In 1990, we discovered that the brain is really organized in networks. When I worked at the National Institutes of Health, I was a project manager for 128 channel EEG and responsible as part of the team to put together EEG with MEG, magnetic electroencephalography, with PET scans, SPECT scans, structural MRI, and functional MRI. That was the team I was on, and we were quite successful at that. And today, those efforts that were done in the first decade of the brain, which has involved $2 billion, form the foundation of the human brain mapping program that's continuing today. And these standards that were developed in the 1990s at the National Institutes of Health and Montreal Neurological Institute are still used today, and I'll be using them here. Now, NeuroGuide imports data from 45 different amplifiers, so you can, it's very widespread, and also EDF and other ones. This one happens to be a Lexicor amplifier, all which are carefully calibrated by calibrated sine waves going into the input of the amplifiers and matching the calibrated sine waves and the amplifiers used to collect the normative database. So we know there's no difference between the patient's EEG because the difference is an amplifier. You got to make sure that the differences, when you compare it to a reference, are because of the patient's brain and not because of something technical like a filter setting or some crazy stuff that's in an amplifier. So I'm not going to go through the details of editing. All of that is on our website, but you always go to beginning to end of the record. What I do in court cases, for example, I go to edit. I do automatic editing. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm going to take 2 minutes, for example. I've already done that. And then I save the data, save the edit, and then I put it in the patient's folder. And then I usually will erase this data. I will go to edit, clear all selections, and I will make a different selection. In courts, I usually make 2 or 3 selections within 1 or 2 minutes and show to the court that no matter what you select, you get the same clinical interpretation. The EEG is actually quite reliable. You can see test-retest reliability is 0.95, 0.97. That's established in the scientific literature. There's over 600 publications showing high test reliability in the EEG. It's a bit like a fingerprint, but it's nevertheless it's a bell-shaped curve when you collect a lot of data, just like a blood test, so you can compare somebody to a reference normative database. The first thing you do after making sure there's no artifact and you have good quality data, I go to view, and I compare it to the absolute power spectrum. The FFT is in the top here. That gives you microvolts squared per cycle per second at different frequencies, and the Z-scores are down in the lower right. And you can see C4 is 4.26 standard deviations, P4 is 2.83, T4 is 3.36. Those are the parts of the brain on the right side where the patient had been injured. It's also a good idea. You can look at average reference, but preference is to look at the Laplacian. The Laplacian is the second spatial derivative of the gradients of the electrical field, and it eliminates medication effects. It's one of the good things that medications are delivered through the cerebral arteries, anterior, posterior, and middle cerebral arteries, and they bathe the entire brain. It creates a very global, spatially global, widespread effect. So what you want to eliminate that. So the Laplacian's job is to eliminate anything that's spatially widespread, and anything that's focal, like in the right parietal lobe here with this individual, it exaggerates. NASA uses this for the exploration of objects in space of various types, dealing with the contours of planets and different bodies in space. It's been used. It was developed in 1810 by Simone de Laplace. In any case, it's very powerful. Very important to do that. It's also, what it's doing is looking at the currents at right angles through the skull. It's also very important for epilepsy, because I'm not going to go into that now, but you will see phase reversals depending upon the orientation of the epileptic focus. I'm going to go back to linked ears. And now what I'm going to do is generate a symptom checklist match. What this will do is calculate all the Z-scores, everything for Loretta and all the Z-scores, and put them into one file. I've already done this. It's called the test.scl, so I'm not going to waste our time on that. But now that you've got all those numbers there, you can create a feedback protocol. And you can just import that .scl file and then link symptoms to the dysregulation in the patient's brain. For now, though, we have the ability to do the Key Institute Loretta, but just showing that to you for current density, absolute power, coherence, phase differences, phase lock, phase shift. The phase lock and phase shift are methods of allocation of resources in the brain in small collections of groups of neurons. Phase slope index is a measure of information flow in the brain. We also have cross-frequency coherence, the brain surfer network viewer, and other types of, we got source correlations. There's a lot of different things. I'm not going to go into those. Instead, I'm going to launch the Neuronavigator, which is SW Loretta. This is the Key Institute is S Loretta, what was developed in 2001 to 2003. The Neuronavigator was developed by Ernesto Soler in 2007. It's used worldwide. It has the same resolution as MEG, magnetic electroencephalography. Essentially what's going on is the brain has a heterogeneous source space. It's got gray matter, white matter, ventricles, blood vessels, all kinds of stuff that influence the electrical field. Magnetism is different. Those heterogeneous environments are invisible to magnetism. So Ernesto made them equal. Magnetism and electricity are the same when you use it. That allows one to look at deep sources like the cerebellum, for example. And you can get much better accuracy. We also use 12,700 voxels using what's called the boundary element method. I'm going to bring up SW Loretta. I've already launched it and let you see it. Because the goal now is to link the patient's symptoms to the patient's brain. And this is SW Loretta. Over here is the connectome. I'm going to just get rid of that for a moment, but it's a two-dimensional view of this brain here. Now the scalp surface, you can see the z-scores are deviant from normal in the right parietal region. I'm going to remove the scalp, and so we can just look at the brain. And I've already gone to connectivity. I've selected, in this case, the attention network because that is his biggest problem. I'm going to remove the cortex. His spatial neglect. So you try to identify the symptoms that are most deviant from normal. I'm going to move this down a little bit. And you can expand it if you wish and examine these networks. Now, right now, I have the connectivity set between 0 and 3 standard deviations. I'm going to go up to 1.6 standard deviations. So now we see which hubs are most deviant from normal. The blue, the z-scores are down here in the lower left, are 3 standard deviations of reduced connectivity. The consequence of the injury was to cause reduced connectivity because it damaged the connections. There are compensatory networks as well that have elevated coherence. But either way, what you want to do is, using neurofeedback, is reinforce towards greater stability and greater efficiency of the weak hubs. Move them in the direction of z equals 0. You'll never meet zero exactly. Nobody is exactly at 0. We're always moving around it. But we don't want to we don't have brain spending a lot of time at 10 standard deviations or 6 standard deviations outside of normal. When the brains are in that momentary state, then they're not processing information efficiently. So you want to reinforce by using operant conditioning, which will change the size and number of synapses, as Eric Kandel got a Nobel Prize for showing. Using dopamine, that's the main neuromodulator that changes the size and number of synapses. And that's what you're doing. You're actually, is doing neurofeedback, you're reinforcing increased number and size of synapses in weak hubs to increase the amount of neural resource available to the individual in a given moment of time. And you can see over here on the right parietal region that's quite deviant from normal. It's red because that's controlled over here in the lower right, the z-scores. You can change those z-score thresholds if you wish. So we already can see what is happening with this individual. We can look at other networks if we wish. The screen here is blocked. I can't quite see it, but I'm going to move this over here. And we can start. What I'll do for a moment is just look at the volume view. And I'm going to expand this screen just so that you can see all the various networks. And so here's the anxiety network, the dorsal attention, ventral attention, autism spectrum disorder. Balance disorder includes the cerebellum. So we can remove the head model, and you can see the cerebellum is affected down in the lower left. We can also look at different parts of the cerebellum. So I'm going to look at now the default mode network. I'm going to put the head model back in so you can see where things are. So you can go through these different networks, and most important thing is to start with the patient's symptoms and see which ones are problematic. He had good executive functioning. He had good language. He had problems with mirror neurons a bit. So you can work on different things. His problem primarily was with attention, also balance problems. So we focused with the protocol to look at both the dorsal and the ventral attention network. So I'm going to now go to the neuron I've already launched his EEG here. You do that by clicking the collection, set up and monitor, and then the amplifier that you want. And then you get, let me just show you really quick. You go to collection, hardware selection. We have many different amplifiers you can do neurofeedback with. In this case, it's just for playback. But whatever amplifier you're going to use for neurofeedback, this is where you do it. Then you set up and you get monitoring. But you also can do a playback before the patient comes in to set up a protocol before the patient comes in if you wish. But you can do it just like I'm doing now in 10, 15 minutes. You've done your analysis. You're ready to go with the neurofeedback because we've already created a symptom checklist match. I'm going to use 2 SW Loretta neurofeedback because it uses 12,500 voxels with higher resolution. It also gives you the cerebellum. And I'm going to click on symptom checklist. I already did the symptom checklist with this individual. And now I'm going to go to networks, and we're going to work on the attention network. These are the Raman hubs determined by PET scans and functional MRI and diffusion tensor imaging related to symptoms of patients, not EEG. This is the National Institutes of Health. There's about 30, 40,000 publications linking these symptoms, these categories, to functional MRI, PET scans, and SPECT scans, etc., not EEG. But we found at the NIH that when you do inverse solutions like Loretta, that you get the same locations as PET scans and functional MRI. So the hubs are the same. So spatially you register. The advantage of EEG, it's in milliseconds. And so you can work at the same hubs that PET scans and functional MRI have that are much slower. They're not dynamic. And structural MRI, for example, it looks the same whether you're alive or dead. So it's a big difference with MRI versus EEG or even functional MRI and PET scans. So that's how you start. And then over here in this box is match. That shows which Z-scores match the PET scan hubs known to be linked to attention. We've also selected already power, coherence, light coherence, and phase differences, as it will be on our protocol. We're now ready to do neurofeedback. We can set this threshold. I have it at 1, but you can. So now we're ready to go. So I'm going to go to session rounds. I'm going to set this for the duration for now, just so we don't. It's a short time here. I'm going to for 1 minute rounds. Joel Lubar and Mark Saab, working with the Fort Campbell soldiers, Fort Campbell installation in Kentucky, helping. We have 8 systems in Fort Campbell working with people from Afghanistan with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. In the course of working with the Department of Defense at Fort Campbell, Joel and Mark and myself developed this panel. So we're going to have a 10-second delay just so I can speed it up. I'm going to go over to the panel here. I'm going to set this to 4 standard deviations because I knew, looking at his record, that he's 4 standard deviations out. The coherence Raman errors are shown here. They're selected because previously I went to report, create symptom checklist match. That's the first step. So we matched, as I showed in the previous picture, the patient's symptoms to the body of knowledge developed for several $1 billion at the National Institutes of Health. Now, we can have a lot of different, we can use a DVD player, multimedia player where you can use any video you want. The ANI streamer we found is the best. What that does is you can use Netflix, you can use child photographs, you can use anything, video of any type with the DVDs, anything, has no limits. So the ANI streamer is really the best one to use if you want to use something other than a simple click. I'm going to use the CZ head just because for demonstration, and I'm going to begin the session. And what you do is you move this display over to the subject's display. At Fort Campbell, the colonel comes in and says, "Soldier, I want you to keep that green dot on." You got that? And he says, "Yes, sir." And so they actually work very well. They get 93% improvement doing just the green dot. But you can see the threshold here is at 4 standard deviations. That's the average. Here's the min-max. You can see the instantaneous z-scores. You see some are 8 standard deviations instantaneously. It's not the FFT is averaging the z-scores or averaging the electrical power over, say, 1 or 2 minutes. It's not the same thing as the instantaneous moment-to-moment variability. So when you're doing neurofeedback, you're really doing this. You're working on the instantaneous moment-to-moment variability. And what you want to be doing is reinforcing the individual. We only got 4 rewards because didn't have the threshold high enough. I'm going to go to the threshold. We also have an all or none. I'm going to do another protocol that's called Z-tones. And what that does, it takes 70% of the scores. Well, it takes 30%. It takes any score that's 70% at threshold or below will give you a feedback signal. The 30% that are not at threshold, if they're moving in the direction of z equals 0, that is, their slope is towards z equals 0, then it'll give you reinforcement. So it's a good way to start with the Z-tunes because you are tuning up the brain to move in the direction of greater stability and greater efficiency using Z-tunes. It's easier for people to get started with that protocol. And once you get that protocol working and you got them, you're getting 20 to 30 reinforcements per session, then you can make it more difficult and you keep moving the patient towards greater stability and efficiency over sessions. But in one session, Joe Lubar and I do this in all the workshops we do, including those. No, he's got 26, which is good. That means that you got the brain is, you really want to find that kind of between 20 and 30 reinforcements per minute. And so that essentially is how you do it. That's neurofeedback. When you finish, you can end the session. I'll just go through this protocol really quick. This is a 250 millisecond window where you've got to be within it at threshold or moving in the direction of z equals 0. You can make it more difficult to make it, half a second, 500 milliseconds. 750 milliseconds is more difficult. 1 second. And Joel, in the worst cases, he goes out to 3 seconds. It's not easy for people to get their brain moving with greater stability and efficiency. But you can keep tuning the brain up in the direction of greater efficiency and stability with more difficult tasks if you wish. You can also use sound. It's always good to use both sound and, now he's got 32. And if it gets too high, you're going to have to then go in and change the protocol and make it more difficult. Now, this is just playback. So essentially what you want to do is create a sawtooth where somebody will get up to 30 or 40 feedback signals per minute. That's too many. You then raise it, lower the threshold, and you'll see they'll go down to 5 or 6 feedback signals per minute. And then the brain will start learning, and it'll go up to 10, then 15, then 20, 25, 30. Now that's a little too high at 30. Now you lower the threshold again, and then you drop them down to 5. And then a while they go to 10, 15, 20, 30. And you drop them down again. So it's a sawtooth you want to use to keep moving the brain towards z equals 0, or in that direction. So that's basically how you do it. When you end the session, you save the feedback session data in the patient's folder. I'm just going to call it something. And then you can also save it as tab delimited information, so you can import this information into an Excel sheet or anything you want. So I'm going to close this. This allows you then, I'm going to stop it, to go inter session. And let's look at SW Loretta. And then over sessions, you can see how the z-scores are changing, and you can see how the z-scores have changed over sessions, and etc. So as one thing I didn't show is now I'm starting the neurofeedback session again. You can do 1 to 19 channel surface nerve feedback. Here's surface nerve feedback here. You can do Key Institute Loretta, S Loretta. You can use the SW Loretta I'm mentioning with 12,000 voxels. And we also will have cross-frequency nerve feedback. So you can do nerve feedback on theta-beta ratios or theta-gamma ratios or alpha-gamma. That's very important because the limbic system is oscillating primarily in theta, neocortex is in gamma or high beta, and those two massive parts of the brain, very important parts of the brain, need to efficiently communicate with each other. So we have norms on those different cross-frequency coupling. So you can, again, just reinforce towards greater stability and efficiency in the cross-frequency domain. We currently have this only for cross-frequency coherence and the cross-frequency phase slope, phase amplitude, so coupling. In the future, we'll have it with S Loretta and SW Loretta as well, so you can actually do cross-frequency coupling between the hubs of the brain. So you get the limbic hubs, hippocampus, the amygdala. We'll even have the cerebellum in the database. But so you compare it to a reference healthy group, and then you can move them in the direction of greater stability and efficiency. It's really important to have a good quality normative database, because if you don't, then you're not going to be directing them in the patient's brain in the direction of greater efficiency and stability. You can actually be moving it outside of the range where it should be. It could make things, I don't know if it'd be worse, but at least you'll waste their time. It's the same thing as a blood test where you want to, if your hematocrits or red blood cell count, white blood cell count is too high or too low, well, you know that by comparing it to a reference healthy database, and then the clinician or provider will recommend the changes in your diet or exercise or give you medication, whatever, to move you in the direction of healthy blood constituents. That concept is the same as what Z-scores are all about. You can't do it with raw scores because you have no idea what. The reason I developed Z-score neurofeedback actually on the database starting in 1994. But I got the idea for Z-scores in 1999 when I went to ISNR, and people are arguing through that. Should I set the threshold at 25 microvolts or 10 microvolts or 35 microvolts? No, I want to do 15 microvolts. No, I always like 8 microvolts. And literally they would argue over these. And then when it came to coherence, they had no idea. Is it 0.2? Is it 0.9? Is it 0.8? Nobody knew. So I thought, well, why not create a reference Z-score in real time? And we distributed that, and we developed in 2004. We distributed it to Thought Technology and Brainmaster in 2004, and they started sending it out in 2006. Since that time, it's over 2,000 people have purchased our Z-score feedback program as a DLL. And in 2009, we developed our own neurofeedback, and Loretta 2010. And so we've been doing that now for over 20 years. So all of that will be available in the future. And we can also do event-related potentials. And then Brain Surfer is another neurofeedback program, but it's brain-computer interface. That's a method that is used. If you do a brain-computer interface search in the National Library of Medicine, you'll find over 6,000 examples of it. There's coherence. It's just real time. You don't have a feedback signal, a DVD or a green dot or anything. You just look at your brain in real time, and then you use different strategies, think different things, and you change your brain in that manner. But it is a form of biofeedback. It's just not one that has a discrete display.
So Bob, you want to show your surface maps and your report generator?
Okay, let's do that real quick. We know we've already got the carefully edited record, and we know it's got good retest reliability. We can repeat it, etc. We know what the patient's symptoms are, and then we go to report. I'll just bring it down a little bit. Report, automatic clinic report writer. Now, it will go to the patient information that we saw under options and take all that information that you have there about the patient's history. It's taking a little time to do this now because we're calculating SW Loretta, which it takes a bit more time to calculate, but it doesn't take a lot of time. It's probably maybe 30 seconds. And you can put in your own company information in here, Rocky Mountain Neuroscience, whatever you want, American Balance Institute, address, contact information. You can put your company logo in. You can do a scan of your signature, so it'll go in the report, your name, your credentials, etc. Next, you can look at traumatic brain injury, discriminative function, learning disabilities for ages 5 to 18, so you don't want to do it with this guy. Brain performance index, concussion index, optimization index. These are ways to look at hubs that are real high IQ people and move them in the direction of peak performers. These are the best of the best in the group. I'm going to look at attention protocol. I'm going to certify that it's artifact-free data, and then I'm going to generate a report. Normally it takes a half an hour to write a report. So you'll see now how fast it is to make a report. This is a Word document that has all this information in it, gives summary based upon the neuropsychological literature about different parts of the brain being deviant from normal, which is radar maps. There's SW Loretta images. There's all the topographic maps in the scalp surface, coherence, phase, all those things are in the report. Here's an addendum at the end with publications and an explanation of everything. And now you're ready to go. We just generated a clinic report. You go to File, Save As, and then you navigate to the patient's folder and save this as a Word document. Then you can come in here. It's a template. You can change anything you want. The EEG, for example, here is a summary. The QEEG analysis deviated from normal and showed dysregulation of bilateral frontal lobes, especially in the right frontal lobe, bilateral temporal, especially in the right temporal lobe. Loretta showed dysregulation in the right supramarginal gyrus and right posterior cingulate and cuneus. Frontal lobes are involved in executive function, abstract thinking, expressive language, sequential planning, mood control, social skills. All of those statements I just made come straight out of a neuropsych textbook. So those parts of the brain that are deviant from normal, we repeat what's in neuropsych textbook as far as what is known from penetrating head wounds, strokes, tumors, functional MRI, PET scans. So that's where that science comes from. And then you can modify this, take anything out you want, put stuff in if you want, etc. It's completely modern. Then it goes into individuals. And so it's a template you can use to then, this is a summary. See the right parietal lobe is deviant from normal. The blue here shows there's disconnection in the right parietal region like we saw in the navigator because he was struck there. The left hemisphere here is compensatory for this individual. He has a perfectly normal left hemisphere. I looked at a CT scan. He has good verbal skills. He's a smart guy. He was a Mensa, he's an entrepreneur with 2 businesses. He was leaving the business in the evening, going back to his home, and he was attacked. And so you have all this stuff as documentation in here. You got radar maps that show deviation from normal in different Brabant areas. And then you got the neuronavigator. And this is the link gears at 1 hertz. And this is the Laplacian at 1 hertz. So you can see that left frontal is deviant from normal in the Laplacian. It's as though he had a counter-coup injury. He got struck in the right parietal lobe, but his left frontal also was affected. But you don't see that with linked ears. You really need the Laplacian to see his counter-coup injury. And he did have some depression after his injury, and left frontal lobe injury is often related to depression. Right frontal lobe injury can be related to exaltation, the opposite of depression. Many times in shock trauma, patients with right frontal lobe damage would talk the neurosurgeon into releasing them early, and they go back home. They can they essentially destroy the families, and the parents or the loved ones would come back and say, "Wish you never let my husband or my son come home." And so, whereas the left hemisphere damaged patients, they're depressed, but they're compliant to they're self-aware, and they're compliant to the therapy. It's one of the differences. Anosognosia, it's called, for right hemisphere dysregulation. And there's the discriminant function. So that's the automatic clinic report.
Very good.
And then you save all this. You want to be able to save everything. It's very important to go to Save File, Save As, NeuroGuide, because NeuroGuide saves all of this information, the annotations, the artifact selections, a whole lot of information that you may have in there is saved. If you go to EDF, you're not going to save everything. If you're going to court, you can save the gesture selections in EDF, which is universal format or text, and that allows the other side to see just your selections, but you also can, I'll just show you, do EDF. I'll just type in test. And now you can export the entire record, and that's the court wants to see the entire record, not just your selection. So you can save that, or you can export just your edits. That shows the court just a part of the entire record. The record may be 15 minutes long, and you only work on 3 minutes, 5 minutes. So you can, or 2 minutes, whatever it is. That way you show both to the court and to the experts. And quantitative EEG is now admitted in practically every state in criminal cases. It's recently admitted at the Supreme Court, QEEG, Supreme Court, just about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And again, fund development is this, I don't know why it's like that, in which you can also look at diffusion tensor imaging. And so you can import, this comes from the Montreal Neurological Institute and the National Institutes of Health. This is diffusion tensor imaging. You can see the differences in the Z-scores. You color them just like as though they are the same as they were for coherence. And you can see differences in different fiber bundles that are linked to the patient's symptom. And then you can see if I can, under symptoms, you can also look at different frequency bands. You can look at raw scores or Z-scores. I'm going to go to the symptoms. There's Parkinsonism. Now, for the first time, we can actually help people with Parkinsonism. I'm going to get rid of the diffusion tensor imaging. And this is the hubs for Parkinsonism. Just look at all of them. Move this around a little bit. This is the subthalamus, whoops. Thalamus and subthalamus, and we go up here. Subthalamus and thalamus. And then you can add things to it. And this is the somatosensory cortex. These are the cerebellar nuclei and the relay nuclei, the vermis, etc., different parts of the cerebellum. Cerebellum outputs to the red nucleus and dentate the relay nucleus, which then goes to subthalamus, and subthalamus to the thalamus to the cortex. So the cerebellum doesn't actually connect to the cortex. It goes through these relay nuclei. So it's important to look at them and look at the connectivity that's deviant from normal. And in Parkinson's patients, you can see that you can reinforce greater stability in the compensatory network because dopamine degenerates in the basal ganglia, but the cerebellum does not have dopamine. So when you reinforce the cerebellum, you reinforce the compensatory aspect of movement. And that's been shown in monkeys and in people. The SMR of the somatosensory cortex has been shown to actually change the red nucleus neurons and their connectivity in monkeys. So that's what you're doing when you're doing neurofeedback. The advantage you have with the neuronavigator and with NeuroGuide is that you can be more specific. Specifically look at the hubs linked to the patient's symptoms. So now you get greater specificity. And it's known in the operant conditioning literature that specificity, increased specificity results in increased fewer sessions, greater operant conditioning efficiency. If you're not specific or as specific, then it's going to be less efficient in getting operant conditioning. Skinner showed that in his work at Harvard with operant conditioning. It's well established that you just want to try to be specific. And you also have compensatory hubs and you have weak hubs. And part of the art is to identify the weak hubs and work on them so that you, and you can also, we have the connectome here. I'll just show you really quick. And you can change it. The connectome is a two-dimensional representation of these three-dimensional hubs. That's all it is. But it's important. The connectome is a very important part of the human brain mapping program. And so now you have both the three-dimensional and two-dimensional views. You can examine how they change their colors, whether it's short distance or long distance connections, etc., in a two-dimensional way, as well as a three-dimensional way. Or you can just look at the connectome and nothing else. Etc.
It's beautiful.
And if you double click, it comes back to its default situation. So if you got it up here and you want to get it back to where it was, you got it blown up out of, well, here's the vermis. And you can see how the vermis is changing with being connected to other parts of the brain. There's a red nucleus, subthalamus, etc. So you can, and these colors will change depending upon the Z-scores. So this is Z-score comparisons. Here's the raw scores. Can't tell as much with the raw scores. Hello there, Tiff. Thank you for inviting me, and also thank you for doing this because it's a